Oh, hi. This is I'm International Master John Watson, and this is Ask the Master on ICC TV. The idea of this show is to provide players with a forum to ask questions about chess and the chess world. But unfortunately, as I just found out, I would normally be telling you at this point about how to send me messages to my email, but I'm afraid that ICC is actually discontinuing this show in order to restructure its offerings. So this will be our last week on YouTube. Hopefully I'll be appearing somewhere else, but I'll be very likely switching to producing videos in the near future on ICC. So this is bad news for me, and hopefully for you too. I hope it's not just a relief. And my sincere apologies. By the way, I hope everybody can hear me. Say something if you... I got an oh no, so you probably did hear me. I'd like to thank everybody for listening and participating in all these shows. This is by far the most fun show I've ever done because of the fact that it's spontaneous and it has some participation by everybody. And I've really appreciated the great questions and all the fantastic input, even your jokes. I would like to revive this format at some point in the future on YouTube, perhaps on my own site, maybe with other videos also. But for now, I guess, again, I just should thank you for listening. I think we'll have just a regular show here because I didn't prepare anything special for this. And I will probably just do the usual things. I should say, by the way, on a personal note, you can still send me questions. I'll still have the AskIamWatson@chessclub.com email. That's AskIamWatson@chessclub.com. You can send me email anyway, regardless whether we have this show, just about if you want some chess advice or you want to just stay in touch. I'm totally open to that, and I'll try to get to all of them. So as I say, you can use AskIamWatson@chessclub.com. If that gets discontinued, I'll give you another email to use. I'm still soliciting ideas for the video series that we're going to be doing. So I've already got a few suggestions, but you can still send them, as I say, again, to AskIamWatson@chessclub.com. For video series, these would probably be about 10 to 15 videos in a series and can be about just about any subject. In fact, I'm really just looking for ideas and subjects that people would really relate to. You know, I've done things in the past about middle games, I've done things about pawn structures, I've done things about openings, a lot of them about openings. I don't know how many of you are ICC members, but hopefully plenty of you are, and you'll be interested in going there. They have a lot of great offerings. So having just found out it was the final show, I don't really have anything out of the ordinary, but I want to look at, there's another game that someone sent me. That'd be the last game, and I think that'd be nice. And remember, there's a 30-second delay here if there's something on the chat, but you can say anything on the chat. If I say something beforehand that doesn't respond, that's because of the 30-second delay. Okay, so let me just pretend it's a normal show, and I'll get started. I got a great question about the Owen's defense, which is this obscure defense that people played in the 19th century a little bit and never played again, and just recently Carlsen played it again, and other people have been playing it. There's a couple books on it. It's the move 1b6, and all of a sudden it's gotten kind of popular, even though it's a little bit marginal in my opinion, but so what? So that's the Owen defense, or Owen's defense. I don't know what's the proper word for it. The question I got, let me just do this. The question I got was, let me see. Let me just check this out for a second so I can quote the question. Oh yeah, white played the usual move here, and black played here. And the question is that this isn't in my book, he says, and soon black played knight b4 and took my bishop. So that's like this. Actually, I think this is a fun one to have in the last show because we love doing irregular openings, and this is the one that you can play maybe with either color. You might have some fun looking at this stuff like this. And just by coincidence, this is a great question also because I was just dragging out my old copies of Kaiseber magazine, which is an old German magazine by an international master, Stefan Böcker, who's a tremendous magazine, went on for years and years and years. It was very unique, and it had a lot of original material, mostly about irregular openings, all sorts of strange irregular openings, but also about history. He had some great writers who would write historical articles about the great players. Anyway, some fellow named Maurice Wind suggested this knight c6 move. I remember this, and before I get to that, let me just show you some fun things about the Owen. From White's point of view, this move is fun. You'll still see that played a fair amount. It's analogous to the English opening where you play that move. And the idea seems to be that if White takes this, Black's going to win a whole rook in the corner. But in fact, White can have a lot of fun here because of check, here, and here. And now there's a threat of checkmate in one with one of these two moves. And if Black plays here, there's a very cute mate here, which goes check and mate. So this is why f5 isn't very good. The reason Black might play it is because he might think that he can get away with this move, which is the move he plays in the English defense. And the idea is that after check here, it's not really that, this is not maybe such a bad position for Black, because he's coming down this way, he's going to win this rook, and maybe his king isn't even that exposed. That's the thought. But there's an amazing trick here. That's the way you play it in the English defense also, by the way, in which case e6 is already in, and c4 is already in. And that's relatively respectable. This one has a supposed refutation. I think there's a couple of ways to win this position for White, but it's very interesting to play check here. And then there's this amazing move here that's kind of fun to see. Now, there may be other ways to play this, you know, just developing and getting a piece like there, for example. But one way to, theoretically at least, according to theory, win this position is to play this move. As I recall it, there may be an easier way to win this, but this is the prettiest by far, which seems to give up even more material. But if Black takes this, which is probably the main idea, White plays here, threatening what? This bishop. And if the bishop takes, then Black can't really escape this attack. This is just too strong an attack. Actually, I don't remember the details, but it's probably something like check, check, and then maybe one slower move. Now, how are we going to checkmate him here? Hang on, maybe I should wait right here. I think maybe we want to bring a knight into play, something like knight here, for example. Or even let's try it this way, because then we can go to g5 and maybe f7. Anyway, this is a huge attack. You can imagine this, right? That this is just an enormous attack. And it does win if you're playing correctly. I don't remember all the details. So that's kind of a cute thing for White. Now, from Black's point of view, of course, he's going to do something different. Usually that's this move. And there's an awful lot of theory about this kind of stuff. Now, in the Carlsen game, Black already had knight f6 in and White had knight c3 in. And that made a huge difference because, let me just show you that. It was something like this position because Black was able to establish a knight on e4. This is against Caruana. And Carlsen actually won this game. I think it was against Caruana. Don't quote me on that. I'm not absolutely sure. I'm pretty sure it was. Very recent game, actually. And, but in this position, that doesn't work because after this move, you play here and there's no, and the knight's sort of stranded out there. Or maybe even White would play something like this, and then that probably wouldn't be a very sound move. The fact that the knight's on c3 means it can be pinned with bishop b4. That's the difference. I mean, for example, even this position, even if White played slowly here, there's no pin with bishop b4 like there is with the knight here. So what Black has to do something else. And in this case, he does something very dramatic and radical, which is plays this move. That was Moritz's Wind move in the old Kaiseber magazines, which are classic magazines. I know someone who has a complete collection. I have an almost complete collection. And the question is that Black played knight b4, and the idea of knight b4, let's just say White did something real slow and stupid. Black plays there, threatening to get the bishop pair, but if the bishop moves, he's going to win this pawn. So that's the danger. So the question is, shouldn't White just play c3? And I guess the answer is yes, that's a good move. There's nothing wrong with that. White should have some advantage after c3, and that's the move we'll look at. But I just wanted to point out, you can also play sort of cleverly with a move like that. And after knight b4, you can actually move this bishop. And the idea there is that if he takes that, you have, for example, this move, check. There, check, king goes somewhere, doesn't really much matter where, and then you go knight takes. And even though it's even material, Black's king is exposed and can't castle. White's going to put White's got the center, and that knight's sort of sitting out there doing nothing, so black's going to lose even more time. So that's kind of a cute line. So really, the threat of knight b4 isn't necessarily a threat, because white can simply sidestep it. Now black actually would play something else here, maybe like that. And I don't know, maybe like this or something. But white is still better because he's got so much more of the center. There are weaknesses over on this side of the board. I mean, the easiest thing to do is just take that, I guess. And not absolutely sure if there's a way of getting the light squares immediately. Maybe c4, and maybe just castles, followed by c4. And this is just a much better position. Black's completely undeveloped. White's well developed and is able to push black back and win the center. So really, there's not much of a threat of knight b4 if white plays knight f3. So black should play something else. I'm not quite sure what here. Probably, good question. Maybe just e6 again for now, and worry about how to develop later. Okay, so the question was about c3 though, and I think that is a good move. That stops knight b4. It supports the center. And what Maurice Wind used to play here was this move. That was what he recommended. Now I still think white's probably a little better in a position like this, but black can kind of reorganize, put a knight there and a knight there, maybe try to bring a bishop here. Be kind of fun to play for black maybe. But what I noticed is white maybe can still play this move with the same idea, that if black takes, which is probably, by the way, probably not even the best move, because knight b4, which looks so attractive, now if the bishop moves, you've got bishop takes, right? That's what it looks like. But guess what? We have this again. Okay, now here's the amazing thing. This position, after check, it looks at least as bad as the other one, because black's king is wide open, and black's not even going to be ahead in material. It's going to be even in material. But this position, black has this amazing move, and really white has to get his piece back, and then black can play this move. And I analyzed this quite a bit, and I think this is actually about equal, amazingly enough, if black plays really well. He's threatening rook e8. Of course, he's threatening queen takes. And this position, amazingly enough, I think is roughly equal. So isn't that something? For example, let me see what I got here. I have, trying to see. Oh, that's even my main line here. Okay, my main line here is this. I think that's the best move for white. If he plays something like this, black just comes over and wins that knight. Notice his pawn's pinned. And ends up with a decent game, probably about equal. I think white might be able to keep a small advantage this way, but it's not really that clear. Black just checks, gets another piece out, and then develops. And this is an odd position, but maybe black's okay because he has good development. Interesting position. Maybe white's a little better, but amazingly the king's surviving up there on g6 just fine. So actually what white should do is just ignore black castle and threaten rook e1. And this is actually a lot better for white, I think, because he's got to do something about this rook e1 move. These pieces are coming out really fast for white. There's also queen b3 ideas. There's, again, now bishop takes is really threatened. And if black plays a move like that, you just play rook e1. And then there's the development's just a little bit too fast. All the tactics seem to work out for white. I think here black should play, if black plays something like this, which looks like an obvious move, then white can actually just take this and play knight here, which is a threat anyway. And if black plays bishop d6, then he can take it and play knight g5. So, and then if this, I think the problem here is that even though black wins the exchange, white better get out of the center. White doubles those pawns and gets a huge attack. Queen a, maybe here first, then queen h5. a3 followed by bishop d5, for example. This is very tough for black. Not necessarily completely lost, but certainly not good. Anyway, a lot of cute stuff going on in Owen's defense. So this position I don't think black's going to be very happy with, as it turns out. You can try what you want here, but just nothing seems to really work in this position. I couldn't find a good way to defend. This is just too strong. Black's just too exposed here. No matter what happens, there's going to be this queen a4 check. It's going to give him all kinds of trouble. For example, here you might even play it immediately because that threatens queen takes there too. So a move like this, white just wins. And if the king comes over, well, white's way ahead in development and the king can't move. So maybe white just attacks this, gets more development, and then plays, I don't know, knight c3, a3, maybe a3. Maybe he just plays to win this pawn back, and then there isn't even a problem with material either. It's even material with with that horrible king sitting there. Anyway, it's kind of fun. Okay, let me see. Yelling at my screen. It probably makes no money. Here we go. So we're getting comments about the closing of the show. I figured we'd get that. And it's very nice of you to regret it happening. Okay, here we go. Nobody cares about my Owen game. Why is it the last show? Yeah, I think it'd be fun to do that on YouTube, to do something like that. Try to do an equivalent kind of show. Would be really neat. I'm voluntarily leaving the show. Well, not quite. ICC is actually reorganizing everything, and I think they're not going to be using the YouTube vehicle anymore, but they're going to be using videos on ICC and trying to offer. It's already offers tremendous content. It's really worth it for the membership because it has the best players in the world for one thing, playing. No, so there will be every Russian schoolboy, just not on YouTube. You'll have to go to ICC. At least that's my impression. I shouldn't talk for ICC. I just found out about all this. Okay. Yeah, and I was thinking I could do videos also on YouTube. Opening videos, repertoires, things like that would be fun. But I don't know how soon that would be happening. And in the meantime, I'll be doing videos for ICC, of course. I watch all the Yermo. Oh, he's wonderful. I really love watching Yermo. I think he's fantastic. You might have to just join ICC and watch him there, because I think they're still having it on ICC. The moderator here can confirm that. I'm watching. Don't you speak German? Lived abroad. Well, speaking that's an exaggeration. I wouldn't call myself fluent, but I do speak some German, and I certainly can translate it. I can translate it very well. I've read fairly complicated novels in German. My speaking is pretty exactly. No, I can get along in conversation, but that was 30 years ago too, so I'm very behind. I watch some German shows though, like Weissansee and Buko and König, and a bunch of German shows. Turkish for Beginners. I don't know if you guys know all these shows, so at least I'm keeping up on the listening side of things. But my speaking never was that good, and now it's becoming probably horrible. What is your opinion about the French Fort Knox? Good question. Maybe indirectly people say riot. Yes, riot. Yes. I'm not eating until the next show. That's very good. I'm going to play the C4 Petrov in memory of the show. Terrific. I love the C4 Petrov. It's such a wonderful thing. Oh, I didn't see the top players list. You should do that, though. And I'll find some way to use it somehow. We should still talk about that. Yeah, I think Yermo's absolutely fantastic. I love Yermo. He's such an eccentric and a good guy. Come play chess with the Starbucks. I will. You send me an email, Jordan. Does Yermo still have his MAGA baseball cap? Yeah, I think he does. Lost sound. Okay, but apparently it sounds okay somewhere else. Try your speakers. I'll remember all the German. I doubt it. I was never that great a speaker, but I think I'm still feel pretty fluent as a reader, and even I translated some material, and I think I did a pretty good job of it. In others, I've read a lot. I have a large vocabulary. And of course, my chess reading of German is exceptionally good. Okay, what's your opinion about the Fort Knox? Well, let's do a little chess. What the heck? And I want to show a game, too. I think I have another one from Jonathan, actually, or from somebody. Actually, Colin McCaffrey, I have one from. And we'll look at that. In fact, maybe I'll do that next. Let me quickly show something about the Fort Knox. We have looked at it many shows ago, but not in any great detail. One thing I kind of like, the Fort Knox has to do with playing this bishop d7, c6. It's a Rubinstein. It's like the same thing as the Rubinstein. You play either knight c3 or knight d2. Black takes, white takes, and now the Rubinstein we've looked at quite a bit and goes like that. But you can also play what's called the Fort Knox. I've never been a big fan. I think there are several good answers. I think I showed you guys this very interesting answer in another show. I think that's kind of a cool idea. The idea is that, see, one of the big things about the Fort Knox is that at some point, let's just make some moves here. White, at least in the old days, used to play, for example, here, and then Black's whole idea in the Fort Knox, or his main idea, is to actually take this, give up the bishop pair, and then play what I call in my ICC videos the restraint center. Also in my book, in my books, I call this the restraint center. It's a particular structure. It's a structure where knights are almost as good as bishops, and you notice black's left with his good bishop. So the Fort Knox is, and his bad bishop is gone. That was his bad bishop, but it runs into its own pawns. So at least black has his good bishop left, and he's got a solid position. He can develop quickly, and it just turns out knights aren't too bad because you can see it's hard to get a break in for white. Usually the bishops would like to make some sort of pawn break eventually to open up lines, and here it's hard to get that pawn break in. Nevertheless, I think white's a little bit better in this position, just my opinion. You can avoid that by playing, as I say, one cute way of doing it is by playing this right away. Very odd move, because now if he takes, not having the queen there is a big advantage for white. Really, that was a very awkward queen, and this knight is perfectly placed for the center. Of course, black wouldn't take that immediately, but just so you'd see that. The other thing is, let me show you this line. I think Svidler, for example, plays this way. Very simply, he played either queen e2 right away or castles and queen e2. I think he played queen e2 right away in this position and got a small advantage. There's always the idea that white might castle queenside. So yeah, this is a nice setup against the Fort Knox. You could go back and look. I think I showed one game with it. If you go way back into my earlier shows, but that would be a quick and dirty answer. That's what you're asking, right? Is what to do as white. Let me see. I hope you guys still have sound. Oh, is it a good opening for black? Yeah, I think it's a reasonable opening, especially for a club player. Yeah, because it's solid. You're not going to get mated. Well, actually, sometimes you do get mated, but it's hard to get mated. You have to make some mistakes. You have to weaken yourself more to get mated. There is this problem that white, you could get mated if white castled queenside and threw everything up the board at the king. But no, I think it's quite a reasonable opening for a club player. I just don't think on the professional level, and you notice it's become much less popular on the professional level. Good, thanks for the sound. I had Carlsen on 6 and Anand on 9. Oh yeah, how great. Yeah, Carlsen on 6 is an interesting choice because he hasn't yet played long enough to really be #1, but he maybe is already almost the greatest player that ever played. So I think 6 is a nice compromise. I think he should be on the list somewhere already. It's just that he's so young that it'd be a little bit odd. And longevity to me counts. I mean, some of these guys, Smyslov, people like that, have gone, and Lasker, who held the championship for, what, 23 years, 26 years, something amazing, and then was a great player after he lost the championship for another 20 years or so. Let me show you a game. Let's look at a game. I want to make this last show fun, and also all the people that sent me games, I want to get as many of them in as possible. Sorry for the ones I did miss. A final viewer game. Let me look at this. And maybe we'll go a little long this time too to cover more stuff, but I'm not sure. Okay, this is Colin is white, and I don't remember. Oh, the person who's black is 300 points above him. That's basically why we're looking at it. He's very proud of the fact of playing this game. This is called the accelerated fianchetto for black. We've talked about it a little bit. We also talked about this funny hyper-accelerated fianchetto, which is that line. And then white can take, and I really like white's position. So black here plays the more responsible move, in my opinion. And this is called the accelerated fianchetto, sometimes the accelerated dragon, or accelerated fianchetto dragon. White retreats. That's a nice move. I like that move. I used to play that myself a long time ago. What's the point? The point is that black isn't allowed to exchange any pieces. If you look at some of the main lines, black will take that piece and simplify and try to win the dark squares. By playing knight c2, even though it costs a tempo, white avoids those exchanges, and this knight can come very well to that side of the board, sometimes to this side of the board, oddly enough, and it's well centralized. And now you might say, well, what about development? But the thing is that with the pawns here, it's hard for black can get his pieces out, but then black's not going to break in the center anyway. So while black's kind of just shuffling his pieces around and getting this bishop out, you'll be able to catch up in development. Okay, black attacks the pawn, white develops, black plays a good move, a good solid move, the dragon move. This is the dragon variation for black, with white having a slightly unusual structure for in view of most people. B6 is an interesting line. If you're going to play B6, most people play B6 now if they're going to play it. And that's a little subtle, but it's because sometimes you want to get these moves out really quickly, maybe play F5 really quickly, and D6 can just be an extra move that you may not want. Also, maybe there'll be an E6 and D5 if you're really, really lucky. So this is a little different b6 than is usually played, but it's been played plenty. I mean, it's not as though there aren't other games with this. The traditional move here, that one of the traditional moves black likes to make, is this move. And sometimes the idea is to double these pawns, because the knights are very strong in this outpost position against the double pawns, is the idea. So that makes up for having the bishop pair. White will often play here now. This is also, you can reverse this. There's an English Rubinstein variation that you can look up, that it's actually black's move in this position, because black is white. White has an extra move, and white actually takes this bishop and this knight. So with white, you're tempo up, and you can play, for example, this move. What did he play in this? He didn't have this position. Play there, and then black plays here, and it looks like he's threatening to win a pawn, like that. But white has a variety of ways, and white can just defend the pawn, but then black can counterattack, and it's interesting for black. But the other interesting thing that I wanted to do as white, I don't know if I ever got this position, but I wanted to play this move, because if black wins that pawn, then this is a very nice, strong attack over here, potentially. Even this move is kind of interesting, because you're going to play f3 maybe, or bishop here and here, and eventually bring the bishop around that way, or back to c3 after you chase the knight away. But here you have two bishops, and there's no dark square bishop protecting the king. So white certainly has compensation for a pawn. I think even maybe a little more than compensation for a pawn. Of course, black doesn't have to take that, and he usually doesn't. He would probably play something else. But this is very solid for white, and very, very attractive position, I think. Okay, now in this game, black played b6, white developed, black developed, and black plays here, attacking this pawn and thinking about attacking this pawn next with either queen up or rook over. Maybe that move's a little early, maybe not, I'm not sure. White simply defends the e-pawn, that's a good move. And black plays there, attacking the c-pawn. White defends that pawn, and now it's a little unclear how black's supposed to make progress. I think here maybe either the move a6, I don't know, let's say what he played was this move. It's a little slow. It has some ideas. The knight, sometimes when a knight comes here, it's good to defend that. Sometimes you play e6 followed by d5, and the rook is nicely placed to open up the position. It's not a bad move. It's an improvement in the rook's position if you aren't going to play f5, but it's awfully slow. So the other things you could do is maybe this move, which looks kind of mysterious, but has the idea of freeing up this bishop, which means maybe later on you'll have an a6 and b5. You'll have some sort of b5 idea. And also this knight might want to go to that square and have more influence on this side of the board. And we also have this f5 idea to break down the center. So that's a possibility. That and a6 are moves that I would prefer over this move, which is kind of slow. And from now on, white plays very well. Black does try the knight fd7. It's just he's a tempo down. White brings a rook to the open file. You can't argue with that. Very logical play by Colin. And now he plays a very interesting move, opposing bishops indirectly, maybe thinking about f4, f5. I like that move. The other move is just to put the knight in the center. That's always very awkward or that can be very awkward for black. I like this move though. Black attacks the bishop. Okay, so the bishop comes back. So black could come back here and white would have to switch plans. White could have also said, okay, I've actually liked the bishop more on that square because it can come over here. Anyway, these things are not that important. So black could come back again and repeat, but I don't think white would repeat. Maybe because of the 300-point difference, black doesn't want to repeat anyway. Black's over 300 points ahead of white in this game. Okay, now black retreats. The only problem now is that queen's farther, the king side's, white's going to have more space on the king side over here, and he can attack on the king side, and you want to be careful that you leave enough defenders. That bishop is no longer defending any of these king side squares. The queen's not defending any of them. The rook isn't. And this rook is off that square, which is another sore spot on the king side. So really, white's ready to start attacking, and that's what he does. He tries to get rid of the best defender of the king side, and then starts attacking. So already, I think we're getting to the point where white is just doing very, very well. Let me notice black preserves that bishop both for defensive purposes and also because it's his best piece over. It's a very strong piece in the dragon. Okay, black retreats and white just keeps attacking, and this attack is probably just very good. It's probably going to be good no matter what happens here. Black retreats there. It's an odd square. He wants to get rid of one of the attacking pieces. But really, where else is it going to go? Maybe here, but I think maybe that's a little better, but I think white still is doing extremely well here. He just sort of drifts over to the king side, plays here. Maybe black tries to get rid of that knight in the center, but I think what you'll find is this kind of position is just extremely good for white. Not even necessarily just because of that weakness, because black can stop a knight from coming to b5, but because white has more space and a very dangerous position. Look at this move. Double attacking here. And really there's no defense to that, is there? You're even thinking, for example, if the knight comes back with the idea of taking there, if white takes on that square, white has this move, attacking here, and things have just gotten out of hand. Too many weaknesses in the center. So a very pretty kind of game. What black did was similar, maybe even worse. White wins on the F file here. A little indirect attack down here at some point, and also the queen might come sweeping over there. Or to F4. Okay, rook F4. I don't know. Probably by the way, just for the record, this is an even nicer move because it pins the knight, and it's more active over here. I think that's probably a better move. Because if he plays here, all of a sudden you have this move, and there's no defense to this square. Or no good defense. Okay, but anyway, it's not that important. Okay, now he wants to double rooks or come over here onto the H file. It also stops a piece from coming to G4, which is probably a good idea. And white does in fact go over to H4. Now there's ideas like, for example, the amazing move bishop F8 followed by queen H6. That kind of tactic is at least in the air. And in fact, that's what happens. White plays bishop F8, beautiful move. And the game is really over here. There's no defense. The threat is queen H6 coming in to just checkmate. And after he plays, what does he try? He tries rook takes F8. Then there's another very pretty way to finish. Now you could just go here, but I think he tries a different method here. Yeah, he tries a different mate. Very nice one. Check, takes, check, there, and guess what? Mate in one. Very, very pretty game. Beating a player more than 300 points above you, so maybe this show has done some good. That's what I always say when the viewers win a game. Okay, what have we got on, here we go. Good for Jonathan Russell, that's great. So we're also winning as black. Yeah, very barbaric, exactly. Will the English defense and Owen's defense work well at a 2,000 plus level? Well, as I say, Carlsen used it. Of course, he used a particular order. White had already committed to knight c3, so black in those positions has this bishop b4 pin and can play pretty normally. And even then, maybe white's slightly better. Okay, Carlsen should be suited for what he did to Ding. First, he destroyed him in rapid, which is okay, but he can still do okay in blitz. No, he gave him just one game. Yeah, it must be hard for Ding, but Ding is very young and very new to these top levels, if you think about it. He's just recently gotten into the top 10. I think he's number 10, and he really just got there. It's true that he's one of the world's top blitz players, but that was, I'm not sure how many years that was. That was as a result of a couple tournaments, so not, someone can correct me about that. But of course, Carlsen in form is just ridiculous. And must be very nerve-wracking to play against, because here's one of the great players of all time, and it's, if you start losing games, I'm sure it's even worse. You just keep losing them, right? I can't imagine winning, even drawing a blitz game against Carlsen. I really can't. Of course, I'm a terrible blitz player, but still, I can sort of imagine in some tournament game getting incredibly lucky and, you know, getting a great opening and therefore drawing or something. But in blitz, I don't think I'd ever. I can't even imagine it. He's just infinitely faster than everybody else, and certainly than I am. So I'd be scared to death of Carlsen in blitz. You know, at least over the board, you kind of feel like, over in a classical game, you feel like, well, I've got a chance to think. It's just a chess game. We both start out with the same material, and you know, I don't think I'd have a really negative attitude, but in blitz, I'd be so embarrassed. Okay, what do we got here? I imagine playing Nakamura too, how insane that would be. Okay, let me see what other comments we have. He was stepping on his headphone. Yep, things like that happen to me all the time. My printer just crashed, for example. Any last thoughts on the Sveshnikov? Any fun ideas from black? Oh, gee, I really don't look at it. White's been doing a little better recently, and remember, black always just played it on the top levels. He always just played it for a draw to get one of those opposite colored bishop endings. So you're not going to find a lot of dynamic, exciting ideas in the Sveshnikov if White knows what he's doing. Of course, when it was first played, there were all kinds of beautiful things, you know, G5s and Rook G8s and all this fun stuff. But right now, it wouldn't be considered a particularly dynamic opening. It's a very positional opening, and that's okay. That might be what you're after. And it's hard to get strong play. You're defending a lot. And what often happens is White has trouble making progress. That's why it's a good opening in some ways, is that White has to work hard to make progress. And certain kinds of knight maneuvers, you know, even if he wins the d5 square, maybe one of the problems from White's point of view is that black can start exchanging things really fast and then get a drawn endgame. It's really hard. I don't have any fun ideas for black. If I knew it better, I probably would. Some people switched to the Kolesnikov, right, because they thought that was a more realistic way to get dynamic chances. The problem with the Sveshnikov, which I should show you now, by the way, there's a couple ways to get to it, but this is the main way. The problem with this is the Sveshnikov playing like this, and usually White plays here and black plays here, and then black drives back the knight is the idea. So, I mean, for example, one of the main lines goes like this. I mean, there's plenty of lines. Black can play bishop e7 also. And one of the main lines goes like this, for example. One thing a lot of people switch to, and I don't know how it's doing now, but unfortunately White knows this opening very well too. You notice this opening's gotten much less popular than just, it was besides the Najdorf, it was probably the way to play the Sicilian just 10 years ago, but no longer. The Kolesnikov, you go here right away, and then instead of the old, for example, this old line, the Löwenthal, which by the way is still kind of interesting, this line, or instead of trying to, I don't remember what the options are, but anyway, black plays here. Very, very similar, but black doesn't have this move in and White doesn't have this move in. And so black maybe is going to play a move like this really fast. They used to call something like this, they used to call it the Pelican. And it's got the same problems. The d5 square can be occupied, but it's a little more flexible maybe because you don't have that problem of bishop g5 and takes on f6. So I might suggest looking at the Kolesnikov if these are the structures you like. Maybe I'm being too negative, but I don't know anybody who plays the Sveshnikov now. It's not bad. I mean, I think it's just plus equals in several lines, but they're easy to play for White. You know those ones where White comes around with the knight here? He gets these slight advantages, and black doesn't have enough counterplay, I think, to be fun. It's just not that much fun. Almost every opening can be played. Show us some Sicilian Taimanov. Well, that's a pretty general question. Let's keep going down for a second, but I'll definitely keep that in mind. I can't say I'm going to do it next week because there's no next week. Is there a line in the French that looks like the English attack from the Sicilian for White, by the way? Wow, I don't think so. The English attack in the Sicilian, by the way, is in any number of variations. White plays bishop e3 and f3. Just for example, the Najdorf, for example, you would play this move, and then you play f3, or play f3 first. The question is there anything like that in the French? And I've never really thought about it, but I don't think so. I can't imagine how you would get that. You can't really play f3. I mean, there's the Winkelmann-Reimer gambit, but that's not really like the English attack. Yeah, I mean, you're not going to have this kind of structure, are you? And that pawn's going to be there. It's just I don't see it. F3 immediately, of course, has this problem that if you did take back, which you wouldn't, but if you did, you'd have this problem: check and takes. So I guess I'd say no to that. The Sicilian Taimanov is probably a question I can answer better than that. Oh, Jordan has a question. What's black's best move? Okay, if you're scared of the queen d4 lines, one thing you can do that people don't seem to know is that it's still considered, I think, completely equal for black to play here first. White can play this move, but this is considered, I think this is still considered okay for black. And if that's true, you've avoided the queen takes d4 line, because if White plays here, defending the e-pawn, and takes, and you play queen takes, well, this is a better version for black of the queen takes d4 line, because the c-pawn can't move anymore. So that's a kind of obscure way of saying that there is a way to avoid the queen d4 line by playing here. Although maybe, some people think White might be a little better here, or they seem to be happy to play White in this position. I'm not real sure. I don't know for sure, but there's just a fun little factoid about how to avoid the queen takes d4 line. What he's talking about is this move, queen takes d4, which is a lot of fun for white and black. You know, you don't see it that often at the top. Peter Svidler played it once. A lot of grandmasters have played it once in a while. The idea is that the queen isn't really going to lose that much time here. For example, if knight here, you're going to give up the bishop pair by pinning that. And by the way, this ending is maybe just slightly better for white, this position. A little more fun for white. So black doesn't usually like to play that, but it's a possibility you got to watch out for. Usually black unpins that in order to attack the queen, and this is a famous position here. You can also play c4 ideas, but this is the one that's the most fun. White, in return for the bishop pair, gets castled really fast and then starts attacking either in the center or on the king side. So that's that's this line made famous by Vasyukov. What are good lines against it? One thing you can do is play a6. It depends on your style. You can go right into the main line and just learn your theory, because this is not bad at all. There's nothing wrong with this at all, this position. But you have to know your theory. I mean, you should study it a little bit, because you can get bowled over because you're behind in development. On the other hand, you have two center pawns to one, and you have the two bishops. So if you can last a little while, you're probably going to stand better, not just equal. Interesting about my green screen. I'll read that later and take your I take your word for it, and I'll study that. That's very interesting to me, actually. The comment by Raster. I won't comment on it right now because, first of all, I don't even know anything about it. But secondly, I think that's a good piece of advice for the future. In the meantime, what was I saying here? Yeah, if you want to avoid all that, a nice move to make is a6, because it stops bishop b5. So you're going to get the knight c6 in with tempo, and that gives the whole position a different character. Like if the queen has to move, then maybe black's fairly happy. That's the idea. So a lot of times what white does now is says, okay, but you've given me one extra move to not only stop b5, but to set up a Maroczy bind kind of position. This is considered okay for black, this kind of position. White usually, I guess, goes here. White probably has some options, could go to e3. But the idea is that black can play a couple things. One thing he can play, probably this first, but he can also play for a fianchetto dragon kind of position. There's also some sort of e5 move. It might even be now. There is some sort of e5 idea that people play. That structure's like the Sveshnikov is pretty playable when the pawn's on c4. So you might want to look into a6. It's a little easier to play. Benko used to play this endgame. I think if black knows what he's doing, it's not really a problem, but Benko was one of the great endgame players of American history, and he won a couple very nice games here. But if black knows what he's doing, he should be okay. It's worth knowing that that exists, though. That possibility exists. This is the main move. White says, okay, as long as you give me the chance to set up a Maroczy bind, I will. But of course that takes a tempo, and it means white's not going to have any attack anymore. You don't have to worry anymore about getting checkmated or something. You do have to worry about white having a bind. Okay? Has Carlsen made any big additions to opening theory? Yeah, he really has. More than you'd imagine. When he was very young, he actually did several new moves in very critical lines. Now what he does, he makes new moves in what tend to be somewhat less critical lines. Less forcing lines, so you don't notice the innovations as much. But believe me, the top players do. He messes up players not only just because it was great play, but he gets a lot of good openings because he'll make one new move. It may not be a move that gives him an advantage by force, but it's one that makes people think and causes problems and keeps all the pieces on the board. Those are the kind of additions he's added. Now you say big additions, and usually when people mean big additions, they mean something in some big main line of the Sicilian or the Grunfeld, or something where all the pieces are hanging. And actually, if you look at his really early days, he had a few of those. He had a big innovation in the Caro-Kann, but he doesn't play those critical lines anymore, those ones where everything's hanging. So that's what people tend to think of when they say big additions. But of course, he's added an enormous amount. He studies a lot of theory. He was talking about that, actually. He's always thinking about these positions. You know, there's this sort of illusion that Carlsen is a intuitive player who doesn't care about the opening at all and just wants to outplay his opponents in the middle and endgame. And of course, you can imagine in modern times that's not really true, and it's not even realistic. He actually figures out cool ways to create problems for his opponents in all these openings. Catalans. You just have to look at his games and notice what the theory was at the time he played the game, and you'll find that there's a lot of new stuff. He made the Berlin popular. I don't think that one's true. Well, because Kramnik, of course, made the Berlin popular, and pretty much everyone started playing it. D3 in the Spanish and Umbrella, he plays very, very well in those lines. You're absolutely right, 2800. If you read about the scintillation, okay, I will read that later. Okay, interesting. We'll check that out. Oh, a solid white screen is better than green. That's interesting. I didn't know that. Okay, cool. Maybe the rest of you learned something there too. If you're going to stream, save that chat and save that tip. Let me see if I missed anything big here. Let me go back to what I prepared so we can catch some more stuff. Oh, I was going to show you that game. You know, this game's been shown so much that maybe I won't. I was going to show you a recent game. Maybe I'll still do that. Oh, there's the great players list. It's a possibility. Let me tell you one of the more intelligent and fun lists that I got. Let me just see here for a second. Give me a second. Where are all those lists? Unfortunately, very few people sent them by email, so I got a few from the chat. Jonathan here said on the chat that Kasparov would be first, Carlsen second, which is, fair enough given his rating. Fischer third, Tal fourth, and Capablanca fifth. Tal, that's a very interesting fourth because he never gets really that much credit. He didn't get back to the World Championship and qualify. He did win interzonals after that, though. The hardest tournaments ever in the world to that point were the interzonals, and Tal won a couple of them, won really overwhelmingly. He had trouble in the candidates against, I think he lost to Korchnoi, lost to several players, and that's why he's not always listed in the top 10. But in a way, that's kind of funny because he was one of the most successful tournament players of all time. He has those two streaks that broke all the records. 92 games without a loss, just wins and draws, and then his other streak was something like 79 or something, and those are the two most in history at that level, playing at that level. So Tal, boy, it's hard to underrate any of these players. And then he has Capablanca as number 5, and of course Capablanca was just a classic, wonderful player. I've never myself thought of Capablanca that high. I mean, like a lot of the other players, he was only world champion, one time, and he did lose to Olyakin, and his tournament record. The thing about, of course, he didn't lose a game for 10 years, but he didn't play that many tournaments during that 10 years. I mean, I think Lasker's record is so much more impressive than Capablanca's, and some people put Lasker as number 2, and I might even put him way up there, like number 3 or so. It's hard to argue with someone who won that many times. Now, it's true his opponents weren't always the top level in the World Championships, but he had great records against all of his rivals, and it's hard to argue against someone who never lost, and then comes back and wins like the New York International, wins the New York 1924 tournament at age whatever he was, 50 or whatever. It's just an astonishing player. Lasker has to be way, way up there. I got a list by email that I thought was really excellent, really interesting. Doesn't totally correspond to mine, but at least it's worth talking about. That put Garry Kasparov as number 1. I really agree with that at this point, just because Carlsen hasn't played as long. And I just want to mention about Kasparov, he has the highest percentage of super tournament wins by a landslide, and he won many more such tournaments than anybody else until maybe very recent times, because there weren't that many super tournaments, and he won almost all of them. It was just ridiculous. And he also holds the record for most consecutive tournament victories. Almost all of them were super tournaments with all the top players of the world, with many of the top players of the world, and he won 15 straight. Nobody's come even close to that. I think Fischer's longest streak was 6. Spassky had 7 or something. Kasparov had another streak of 9. I think Karpov is the only one who also had a streak of 9. Just a record. We just forget how utterly, completely dominant he was. And His second on his list is Karpov. So that's an interesting list. A lot of people of my generation would understand that very well. Karpov was, he not only contributed a ton to chess, but he also had the most tournament victories of anybody, including all kinds of tournaments. And even after losing the championship, if you think about it, he kept qualifying for the World Championship and being number 2 in the world by quite a margin for many, many years. So he's number 1 for years. Like Kasparov, he never went through a terrible period. You know, most world champions, not terrible is a bad word, a down period. Most world champions, while developing, go through some periods where they've got 4 or 5 people who are better than they are. Kasparov never really did. He just went to international tournaments and started winning. And Karpov, basically the same thing. They were the best from a very early age on, and that makes you sort of respect them even more, because it wasn't like their rivals were beating them for many years. I mean, Fischer, for example, is obviously one of the great players of all time, and he was very young, of course, but even when he was a little bit older, you know, he had negative records against 4 or 5 of the, or negative or even against 4 or 5 of the top Soviet players. And so unquestionably, when he became world champion, he was just an incredibly, astonishingly great player. But his overall career might be considered somewhat lower for that reason. You can argue with that, of course. His third was Lasker. I agree with that. He had the longest reign, as I mentioned. He was never defeated in a match until way back, until Capablanca finally beat him. And even that you kind of wonder about. His excuse was the weather, and maybe that wasn't such a bad excuse. It was very, very hot. He obviously wasn't physically really up to it. Maybe Capablanca was better at that time, but if so, only barely so, as Lasker proved in his wins in the 20s, in the 1920s, which was after that match. He gives Botvinnik on his 4th. That's an unusual pick. I think a lot of people think he was given too many chances to regain his title because of the rematch clause, and he didn't win the matches by really decisive margins. But still, here's this person who was at the top of the chess world for many, many years and did very well after he was world champion, too, in tournaments when he was quite old. One thing people don't necessarily realize about Botvinnik is how dominant he was in the Soviet championships and various other top tournaments against the best players in the world, including the tournament he won the world championship at in 1948, the Hague Moscow tournament, and winning those Soviet championships. I don't think people realize how strong he was in the 30s and the 40s, before all those famous matches against people like Bronstein and Smyslov, and those which were in fact very close. And he did lose to Tal after, and he did lose to Petrosian. So I think people who talk about those matches a lot of times don't realize how he was really the best in the world for 10 years before even he won the world championship. And obviously for several years thereafter, even if you argue that then his career wasn't quite as convincing. So that's a good choice. Then the 5th choice he had, I should check the chat and see if we're getting some response to any of this. Let me see. Good reference on the Kalashnikov. Oh, you know, I don't know. I don't know Rotella's book. This is embarrassing. I just don't follow Sicilian theory that much because none of my students for a long time have played it. So I do follow Nidor. I've got a student who plays Nidorf. I've got one who plays Dragon. But I don't know about the Kalashnikov. Sounds good to me. any full book on the Kalashnikov is probably one of the first things to get. And that's about all I can say on that, but sounds good to me. Let me see, what have I got here? Do you think beginners should start practicing chess with mate patterns or endgames? I suspect endgames just to begin with, so that you see simple endgames, you know, king and pawn, things like that. And at the same time, mate patterns. Good question. Those two together are probably the very first thing you learn. Well, very first thing is you learn how the pieces move, of course. So when you're doing mate patterns, you want to use all the pieces. You want to, you know, show how to mate with a rook, with a queen, with an extra queen, and then two bishops, and try to do that. Jordan wants people to like my stream. Thank you very much. There we go. John Hartman knows this. Ah, Cornette has one too. Good. John knows books extremely well. He's the reviewer for Chess Life, and pretty much every month has a review of the latest books. And very, very close reader and excellent writer, superb writer. That's John Hartman. Remember that name? He's been on the show quite a bit. What else we got up here? I'm kind of buzzing up. I hope I'm not missing much. There we are about the screen again. Okay, I don't think I missed anything. Okay, continuing with this list, he has Elyekin as number 5. And how can you argue with that? You know, he has both the longevity going way back into the teens, where he was the 3rd best player in the world, through the 20s, and then he also has what some people value, like Fischer. He has that incredible peak performance in the early 30s and late 20s. So he not only beat Capablanca in that great match, but he also, his only World Championship match that he had against one of the superstars, and not only won that, so he never really, he lost the Owen match. You could hold that against him, but you know, in the long career, that's not such a terrible thing. The first Owen match, but his peak performance was amazing. Avro is a famous example, one of the great tournaments of all time. He just was slaughtering everybody. He was a little bit like Fischer in the last 3 years, you know, 1969 to 72 or whatever. Then he has Fischer as 6. You all know Fischer's incredible wins over Taimanov and Spassky and Larsen. I mean, Larsen was a magnificent player, and he just destroyed him in a match 6-0. That's very scary. Kind of tells you something about the guy. He also was a Blitz champion, which shows what kind of talent he had. Just amazing, and also a prodigy. I mean, he won as young. The funny thing is, he wasn't the kind of prodigy that starts winning when he's 10 or 12 or 10 or 11 or something. He was just a sort of a normal player. But then once he broke through as a very young teenager, he was winning everything right away. So it was pretty astounding. You know, one of the great players. Capablanca's 7. And do we talk about him already? A little bit, I guess. And then Petrosian, I think that's a great little choice. Probably, even though he's one of my heroes, I probably wouldn't put him on a top 10 list. But because of his tournament results weren't that great. But it depends also what you're looking at. Are you looking at originality and contributions to chess and profundity? Then all of a sudden, Petrosian just jumps up, doesn't he? And he also won 2 world championships. You know, we give all this credit to these players that only won 1 world championship. And here's Petrosian, who won 2 of them against 2 of the great players, Spassky and Botvinnik. And yet somehow he's always not listed. He's usually not on these lists, even when you go to 15 a lot of times. And that's really unfair. So he certainly deserves to be there. Whether he'd be on my list, I'm not quite sure, but he'd be way up there somewhere in a list of 20 or 15, I'm sure. Then he has Carries as number 9. This is interesting. Again, tremendous longevity. The players with the great longevity that didn't make the World Championship are Carries, Reshevsky, and Korchnoi. All of them played at a super high level for many years. You know, there's a site, everybody, if you haven't seen it, Jeff Sonas, Jeff, this is what you Google, Jeff space Sonas. Some of you will know it. It's called Chess Metrics. It's out of date now. He hasn't updated it for 7 years or so, but he left it on the internet, which is a joy to all of us. It's a historical re-rating, sort of rating before they had FIDE ratings, and also re-rating based on an algorithm. But in any case, he shows people's progress going way back to the 19th century through every single tournament that they, well, at least that's been recorded or is easy to find. It's just an amazing site, wonderful site. Anybody who likes chess history can spend hours and hours and hours and hours on that site. That's, for example, how I learned how great Maroczy was from chess metrics. And also I learned to appreciate people like Reshevsky more and how long he stayed at the top of the world. People don't really realize that. Anyway, Carries was another one of those players. I think he got either 2nd or 3rd place in all kinds of candidates matches, ones that would have qualified him for the World Championship. So he was very close to playing the World Championship and probably deserved a chance at it. I would say Korchnoi would probably be my choice of that type of player, ones who didn't win the World Championship just because he did make the World Championship and he was just as good for probably just as long, but that's very subjective. Carries was a genius, magnificent player. And then finally 10th was Smyslov, which to me is a little funny because he did win the World Championship, and he won 2 candidates tournaments when the candidates, or 2 interzonals, when the interzonals were, I mean, it was the candidates, but it's the equivalent of the interzonals, the tournament format. He won 2 of those at a time when the golden era of chess, when there were incredible opposition. and he won them both. He also came in people forget this, when he was pretty young, he came in second in the World Championship in 1948, the one that Botvinnik won, ahead of magnificent players, and then he finished very strong. He won tons of tournaments late in his life, and even qualified for the candidates again. And won 2 candidates matches. Well, one was a lottery, so I guess that doesn't count. But only lost to Kasparov in the World Championship cycle of, what was it, can't remember, 80? Anyway, the World Championship cycle in which Kasparov first played Karpov. Smyslov lost to Kasparov in the deciding candidates match. That's how fantastic he was at a advanced age. So great choices. What else do we have here? No response to that. A particular subject, so maybe I won't talk about that. Lasker doesn't get enough respect. I agree. There's an amazing book on Lasker. I don't know if you know about this. It's I think over 1,000 pages. So you can only get it in hardback, and I think they only made about 500, so it's probably impossible to get. Amazingly expensive, but has contributions by tremendous number of great players and commentators about Lasker. It's all just about Lasker. It's a memorial kind of. Memorial's a bad word. It's a Lasker tribute, basically. This huge volume, published in German, of course. That's right. There's no translation. I should tell you about that. But it's just really fun to read if you can read the German, and it's just a collector's item anyway. How about this stupid opening? Okay, this is great. We'll finish our show with a stupid opening. Yeah, this show has shown a lot of irregular openings. I think irregular openings are good because even if they're bad, it's good to see why they're bad. You learn a lot. You learn a lot that you wouldn't learn with other ones. Oh, I don't think that's stupid. That's extremely popular. You've got all the top players of the world have played this at one point or another, pretty much. I sometimes play Bishop D7, and White always gets a nice center plus a pretty large plus. Well, he shouldn't really. Bishop D7 is the most reliable equalizer. The center you're talking about could be, by the way, the most dynamic move that a lot of players like to play and is still considered equal is Knight D7, just because it keeps more pieces on the board, or wins the 2 bishops if White takes it. But Bishop D7 is extremely common. Now you can play funny moves like A4 here, but almost always this is played. And maybe this type of center you're talking about is this sort of thing where you get this kind of thing. And you got to be careful there because D4 will give White an advantage. But Black has a chance to play, this is the most popular defense, just play something simple like, whoops, that wouldn't be much of a move. So something simple like this, contesting the center, and then you've got your share of the center. And this position is extremely well known. I have a student who plays this as White, and we've gone over every possible thing time and time again. And White has good practical chances if he knows what he's doing, but Black should be fine also. You just have to, you should study it a little bit. But Black's managed to sort of challenge the center, so White didn't get that big center you were scared of. And that's true of almost all the lines after Queen takes D7, that White will never get a big center by force. After that move, you can attack this. Whoops, sorry, it's Black's move. Yeah, I was playing here. White can play other lines. I mean, sometimes White plays things like B3, but it's getting the big center with C3 and D4, White can't force that without Black getting counterplay in the center. So you just have to have ways of making sure that that doesn't happen to you without you being able to respond to it. I wouldn't worry about that. You should be fine. You can always look it up in the books too. What else do we have? Yeah, thanks John for those recommendations. I was 1600 about 2 months ago. Then I worked on my calculations. Since I don't have a personal coach, I invented my routine, solving specific mating tactics, 100 Bowden mates, 100 Anastasia mates, 100 backrankers. My calculation has proved much. I'm rated 1800 now. Good. Yeah, I mean, it's great to, that's one way to do it, is to study a lot of tactics. Some people just say, just learn the end game and that'll increase your rating tremendously. My feeling is just study a lot of chess and get absorbed in it and do a lot of thinking about positions. Slow thinking if you can possibly do it. Get a board out, put a position up, whether it's an ending, whether it's a tactic. Maybe even put a clock on yourself so you don't go too fast, and maybe even write down your analysis and then compare it with what really happened. Let's say you're going over a great game. Going over great games will do it. My feeling about improvement in chess, I think I've mentioned this before, is pretty simple, which is that there really isn't any secret. There's no part of the game that's going to absolutely be better than any other part of the game. I mean, most top players, I would say, learned mainly from openings, even though they're denigrated. That's, after all, the opening is early in the game, so it's the most complicated positions are when all the pieces are still on the board. And to understand those positions takes an understanding of middle games and end games, especially middle games. And so you're learning middle games and you're learning tactics when you learn openings too. So I wouldn't underestimate just studying openings, but on the other hand, there's a book by Hawkins about getting better by just studying end game, just studying end games. There's books, and that makes sense because end games are very clear and they can clarify your thinking. They can be really good practice because there's not as many pieces on it. You have to play really accurately and you have to actually calculate well. So end games will help your calculation. I know that sounds funny, but it actually really can help your calculation a lot because usually the principles only go so far. There's a point at which you have to just make the right move, and that's why endings are so difficult. Yeah, it's not just the exact plans in the end game. I think that's a bit of an illusion. Sometimes there isn't a plan. There's just a question of you figure out how to win his pawns or make a break or get a pass pawn in the exact right order. The plan is simple. The question is who's going to implement their plan without the other guy achieving something first. So without a coach. Endgame training, almost all books on the endgame are great, and so are DVDs and things like that. I would do what I just said. Set up ending positions, preferably on a board, but if you just don't have time, do it on your computer. Just set up endings. There's tons of collections of endings you can get off the web for free of classic endings. You can also get just the basic ones. You can get those from all kinds of chess sites. Set them up, but take some time and try and figure them out yourself before you just run to the solution. Carries is overrated, I think. Well, I don't know if he's overrated because a lot of people these days haven't even heard of him. You're older like me probably. Korsner or someone like Anand is better. Yeah, sure, Anand certainly should be in consideration. He won the World Championship in every format. I think Anand's career is certainly better than Kramnik's, for example, and Kramnik, of course, is the other magnificent player of that generation besides Kasparov. Yeah, Anand has a case for any list, actually. Just an amazing career. I think being good nowadays is way harder. Yeah, of course it's harder. Also, that your competition is just much better. It's drawn from a much wider pool of talent of youngsters getting better earlier and making careers. There's many more professionals. They're just stronger. Everyone is just stronger. It's harder to play. And then you toss in these stupid time controls, and it's an amazing challenge. Okay, Lasker is probably the smartest too. Well, he certainly has a reputation. Friend of Einstein. Domus, play out the positions you study versus a weak engine. Practice makes perfect. I agree. I think practicing is awfully good. And then, right, John, look them up afterwards. Look up what's correct afterwards. Don't forget to see, because some stuff you should probably commit to memory, some of the basic positions. But if you try to play them over first, then you'll find yourself learning them much better. Don't cry because it's over, smile because it happened. There you go. How do I improve my technique in converting an advantage? Aha! One of my videos I'm planning is a conversion to the endgame video. I think John probably knows better than I do how to improve his technique. He's doing a great job. He's improving all the time. That's one of the hardest things in chess is converting an advantage, and I think you know that, and all the top authors know that too. And if you get a DVD or a book on it, it's fine, but it usually doesn't maybe help that much as practice does, as much as just getting a lot of positions and working on it. There's no magic bullet that I know of. It's the same thing as improving your technique in general. I don't think I have any particular tips. I have to think about that. Maybe my only tip would be don't be afraid to be aggressive. An awful lot of people have an advantage and think, oh, I've got to keep my advantage. I'm going to be really stupid and lose the game because I try some dumb tactic and let the other guy win. And of course that can happen, but you look at the top players and they realize that advantages can slip away pretty easily. And if they have, you have to have confidence in your calculating abilities. So you have to be able to pull the trigger. If you see something and you think it's good and it's going to convert a minor advantage, maybe a pawn or even just a plus equals kind of positional advantage, into something that's a plus over minus or even better, some sort of tactical win, don't just avoid that because you think you're better and you're scared to give up your advantage. I think that's the mistake I see most often, and the thing that the top players never do. If they'll just you kind of go, why didn't you just play it safe? Of course, there's some positions where you should play it safe. If you're even they play it safe if they're in time trouble and they just don't want to goof around with something really complicated and they're sure they're winning anyway. But these are positions where you aren't sure you're winning anyway. These are just an advantage that we would be talking about. So don't be afraid of looking for sharp solutions. Don't just avoid them on principle. And otherwise, just, there's always things like improve the position of your worst piece, things like that. Just make sure that all your pieces are working well, and checking moves carefully so that before every move, make sure that your opponent doesn't have something that freezes game or ruins your advantage. Yes, Gary. There we go. Actually, that's a funny statement. I don't know if you're being sarcastic there, but Gary, who is, by the way, very possibly a potential world champion and one of the great players, his biggest problem, I think, over the last 4 or 5 years, I don't know how it is recently, has been converting one positions. His technique has been, he and Kramnik's had a little bit of this problem too, but Gary more than anybody. Time and again, he'll get some position that he really should win, and then he only draws. So I wonder if that was a sarcastic comment or a real one. Now, of course, relative to the rest of us, he converts positions great. But relative to his peers, he's probably the worst in the world at doing that, in my opinion. Guillermo is on by the concurrent. Don't know what that means. Try a better or another explanation. I don't understand it. You should create a channel on Twitch and stream regularly. Well, this may happen. On YouTube also at 2800. Yeah, I was thinking, I think it'd be fun to stay on YouTube and do it. That's what other people have done. I certainly hope we'll see you. Thank you very much. And I appreciate all the wonderful comments. This is probably a good time to wrap it up on a positive note. And you were sarcastic. Okay. So Moving Dutchman knew about Gary's one potential weakness. It's incredible that Gary gets the results he does, considering that he has a few problems like that. Just obviously Gary's easy to underestimate. Speaking of underestimating people, I mean, I don't know how the kid does it. It's just at his age, he's the youngest of these superstars, and it's just staggering to me how. I guess he knows a ton about chess, and he has great instincts, and he certainly knows how to calculate. Well, I got a child when you're top 5 and in top form. Now he's top 15. I think he'll never be top 5 again. I disagree. I think he's going to continue to be one of the best players. All these guys have little dips, and at his age especially, you kind of have to expect it. Gary had a great position in the candidates only drew. I don't remember that specific game, but I can definitely believe it because it happened time and again over the years in tournaments and in big tournaments like that. By the way, I should mention one more time, all of you have been so great and so generous and have made the show work. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been a show at all. So I'm very happy to keep in touch with all of you. My email address is still, you can use the same email address, the askiamwatson@chessclub.com. If you've got questions about chess, I'll see if I can answer them. I can't say I'll get to everyone or that I'll give you, a tremendous detail, but feel free to write me as a chess buddy. Don't worry, it doesn't have to be the show, it doesn't have to be a question. And there's Jordan. Okay, send me an email, Jordan, because I'm not going to probably come unless you tell me when you're meeting. This is a local fellow, Jordan, who has a little crew of players that play at Starbucks. You're all familiar with those kinds of situations, and it's really fun, and probably the way chess should be. Okay, thank you, everybody, and I'm really sad that the show is coming to an end, but as I say, think about becoming an ICC member because there's tons of videos on there, not just mine, but tons of other great players, and also the best players in the world play on ICC. The top, really top players play on ICC all the time, and you can get into a lot of good tournaments and to play in and play at all kinds of different time controls and just have a lot of fun. It's a really, really good site. Okay, thanks everybody, and I guess I'll sign off. Thank you.